Welcome back for another deep dive with us. And today we're going to a world of magic and danger and, all those things we love. We're going to talk about A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas.
Yes.
And for anyone out there who maybe hasn't read this one yet, the story follows this human huntress named Feyre, who ends up in this magical realm called Prythian after she kills this creature. And, well, it's not quite a wolf, but.
Right. Yeah, she thinks it's a wolf, but it turns out to be something a little bit more.
Yeah, and she winds up a captive as punishment, but things are not always as they seem, and that's where the story really kicks off.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on beneath the surface for sure. And we've got this great book review that really gets into all the juicy details, the plot, the world building, the characters, even some of the criticisms.
So are you ready to, dive into Prythian with us?
Absolutely. One of the things that I find so interesting about this book is how Maas kind of takes that classic Beauty and the Beast storyline, and weaves in this really intricate world and magic system. So she takes this familiar story and just explodes it into something completely new.
And one of the things that really caught my eye was this whole concept of true names.
Oh, yeah.
It's more than just like a magical name, right? It seems like it's tied to their very essence as Fae.
Right. It's not just a name.
Yeah.
Think of it more like a magical fingerprint, deeply connected to a Fae's power. So, if a Fae reveals their true name to you, it's like this huge act of vulnerability, almost like you're giving them a key to your very being.
Oh, yeah.
Makes you think about, who you would trust with that kind of power and what they could do with it. It kind of reminds me of how information can be so powerful in our world, too.
It's like knowing someone's secrets, right?
Exactly. Like having that kind of knowledge can give you a lot of control.
That makes the Fae seem a lot more vulnerable than you initially think. Which brings us to Feyre. She's this tough, resourceful huntress. She's providing for her family. And then she's suddenly in Prythian, stripped of her weapons, and forced to adapt to this totally new world.
Yeah.
What does that do to her character, going through this huge power shift like that?
Well, it definitely forces her to confront her weaknesses, right? Not just physically, but emotionally, too. She can't rely on her, hunting skills anymore. She has to learn to use her wits and her intuition to survive. And I think that's where we see her true character come out. She's not just tough, but she's resilient, she's adaptable, and she's fiercely protective of the people she cares about.
And I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, finding yourself in a situation that's outside your comfort zone and having to tap into those hidden strengths.
Totally. And, in Feyre's case, that vulnerability becomes this catalyst for her growth. She becomes more observant, more strategic, and even learns to manipulate when she has to. It's really interesting to see how Maas takes that damsel in distress trope and flips it on its head.
Yeah, and then there are the men in her life.
Oh, yes, men.
Let's talk about Tamlin. He's the High Lord of the Spring Court, and at first, he seems like this classic rescuer, this protector. He's handsome, he's powerful, lives in this, beautiful, sun-drenched palace. But he also felt kind of, predictable.
I see what you mean. He does fit that classic brooding, honorable hero archetype, right?
Yeah.
He gives Feyre this sanctuary, surrounds her with beauty and luxury, but there's this underlying sense of control, almost a possessiveness, that hints at maybe a darker side to him.
Is he really protecting her, or is he just asserting his dominance?
Yeah, it makes you question his motivations a bit.
And then you have Rhysand, the High Lord of the Night Court. He's just so mysterious and dangerous. I felt this, instant pull toward him, even though he's presented as kind of an antagonist at first.
Well, Rhysand is really good at playing with perceptions. He cultivates this image of a villain, but there's something else there, like a vulnerability that he hides really well. He's like a puzzle. You're constantly trying to figure him out. Is he really a villain or just a misunderstood anti-hero?
And it's that complexity that makes him so interesting. He doesn't fit neatly into that good versus evil box.
Oh, absolutely. He makes you question your own biases and wonder if things are really as simple as they seem.
And that's something I really appreciate about this book. It makes you think.
Right.
And speaking of things that make you think, we have to talk about the world building.
Oh, yes. The world building is fantastic.
Maas creates this whole intricate society with these different courts, each with their own culture, magic system, and political landscape. It feels so real, so alive.
I love how she uses the settings to reflect the characters' inner lives. So you have the spring court, which is all lush and sunny, and it kind of mirrors Tamlin's initial charm and protectiveness. And then the night court shrouded in darkness with the stars. It hints at Rhysand's hidden depths and secrets. It's like their personalities are woven into the very fabric of the world.
It's almost like the setting itself becomes a character in the story.
Exactly. And as Feyre delves deeper into Prythian, she starts to uncover these secrets that bind the world together. And she realizes that beneath all this beauty and enchantment, there's this darkness brewing, a threat that could destroy everything.
And that's when the story really grabs you.
Oh, for sure.
You realize that her journey is about so much more than just surviving in this magical world. She has to understand the power dynamics, the feuds, the threats, the secrets. It's a lot like our world in a way, right?
Yeah, it definitely has those parallels, where things aren't always what they seem on the surface, and there are these hidden agendas at play.
And Feyre's caught right in the middle of it all.
She is.
Mm.
And she's forced to make choices that will have huge consequences, not just for herself, but for everyone around her.
So we have this vulnerable but resilient protagonist.
Yeah.
We have this world full of magic and danger.
Mhm.
And then we have these two really intriguing male characters who represent different sides of it all.
Right. And this is where things get really interesting, because Feyre's journey is about to take a very dramatic turn, and it's going to challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, about love, and about the true nature of power.
I am so ready for this. Let's dive into part 2 and see where this journey takes us.
So you know how we were talking about the Spring Court seeming like this perfect place?
Yeah.
Well, as Feyre spends more time there, she starts to see that Tamlin's protection comes at a cost. Like, it's not as idyllic as it seemed at first.
Right. She's safe from the outside threats, but she's basically trapped within the Spring Court. Every move she makes is watched, and she's not really free to be herself. It's like a gilded cage, Beautiful, but still a cage.
Exactly. And I think that's where Maas really digs into the whole idea of power dynamics. It's not just about physical strength or magic, but about the subtle ways that control can be used. Tamlin, he might have good intentions, but he's keeping Feyre dependent on him.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if he's really trying to protect her or if he just wants to control her.
Right, and it makes you think about how that can happen in our world, too. Like, sometimes people can be limited by societal norms or expectations, even if it's presented as love or protection.
It's like you can feel safe and cared for, but lose your own sense of self in the process.
That's a good point. And I think that's what starts to push Feyre towards Rhysand. She's yearning for something more, a sense of purpose beyond just being protected. And Rhysand represents a different kind of power, one that comes from resilience and cunning.
And their connection is so intense.
Yeah.
Every time they interact, there's this spark, like they're both drawn to each other, even though they know it could be dangerous.
And I think that's what makes the love triangle in this book so interesting. It's not just a simple choice between two guys. It's a battle for Feyre's soul, Does she choose the familiar comfort of Tamlin or the dangerous but exciting allure of Rhysand? Rhysand sees her potential, her strength, and he wants her to break free.
And then there's this whole idea of mating bonds in the Fae world.
Oh, yeah.
It adds this whole other layer to the relationships. Like there's this element of destiny involved, It makes you wonder if love is a choice or if it's something that's preordained.
That's such a good observation. And I think that's what makes it so thought-provoking. It's like Maas is raising questions about free will and destiny. Do we have control over our lives, or are we just playing out a script that's already been written?
Yeah, it's like the whole debate about arranged marriages versus love marriages. Is it better to follow tradition or to risk everything for love?
And for Feyre, the mating bond becomes this catalyst for self-discovery. She has to confront her own desires and figure out what she really wants.
I love how all of this ties back to that theme of empowerment. Feyre isn't just accepting her fate. She's taking control of her life, even if it means defying expectations.
Right. And as her power grows, she starts to realize that it's not just about personal strength, but about using that strength to protect others.
Oh, and speaking of protecting others, remember that looming threat we were talking about?
Yeah.
Well, it starts to take shape in this book in the form of Hybern. He's this really tyrannical figure who wants to enslave both humans and Fae.
Yeah, Hybern's such a great villain because he represents everything that's wrong with power. He just wants to control everyone and exploit them for his own gain. He's the opposite of Rhysand, who, despite his flaws, actually uses his power to protect people.
And it's interesting how Maas kind of draws parallels between Hybern's tyranny and the oppressive systems that we see in our own world.
Yeah, definitely. It makes you think about how power can be abused and how people in authority can use fear and manipulation to maintain control.
It's a reminder that the fight for freedom and justice is something that never really ends.
Right. And Feyre, with her newfound strength and determination, becomes a symbol of hope in that fight. She refuses to be a pawn, and she chooses to stand up for what she believes in, even if it means putting herself at risk.
She goes from being a captive to being a warrior. It's really inspiring to see.
It really is.
Yeah.
And her journey is far from over. The first book ends with a sense of anticipation. Like the battle for Prythian has just begun. She's emerged from the shadows, but the real test is yet to come.
Okay, I have to say I was a little surprised by how quickly some of the conflicts were resolved at the end of this book.
Yeah,
It felt a bit rushed, like Maas was eager to get to the next part of the story.
I know what you mean. Some people have criticized the pacing, saying that some plot points were predictable or that the resolutions felt kind of superficial. But I think it's important to remember that this is just the first book in a much larger series. Maas is setting the stage, introducing the characters and the world and the conflicts that are going to drive the rest of the story.
It's like the first act of a play, you know? You're getting introduced to the main players and the themes, but the real drama is still to come.
Right, and even if some of the plot points feel familiar,
Yeah.
I think Maas elevates them through her characters and world building, like the love triangle, for example. It's a common trope, but she turns it into this really nuanced exploration of power and personal growth.
And her writing is so evocative.
Oh, yeah.
She really transports you to Prythian. You can practically feel the warmth of the spring court or the chill of the night court.
She uses these incredible sensory details to create this immersive experience. You can almost taste the fairy wine and smell the flowers and hear the whispers of ancient secrets in the wind.
It's more than just a fantasy romance. It's a journey of self-discovery and a celebration of female strength.
Yeah, and it reminds us that even in the darkest of times, hope and love can still prevail.
But even with all the magic and adventure, Maas doesn't shy away from those darker themes.
Definitely not.
We see glimpses of trauma and abuse and the psychological effects of captivity. She handles it sensitively, but it's definitely something to be aware of.
Right. The book has this message of hope and empowerment, but it also acknowledges the reality of violence and the impact it can have on people.
Which makes the story feel more grounded and relatable.
Exactly. And it's in those darker moments that we really see Feyre's strength.
Right.
She's not just a warrior, she's a survivor. She's faced her demons and come out stronger.
And makes you think about the resilience of the human spirit, our ability to overcome even the most difficult challenges.
And in the later books, we see Feyre's strength tested even more. She becomes a leader and a strategist. But that's a story for another deep dive.
I can't wait to get to those books. But before we wrap up this part, I have to ask, what do you think is the biggest takeaway from this first book? What really resonated with you?
That's a great question. For me, it's the idea that true power doesn't come from brute force or magical abilities. It comes from having strong convictions and being willing to fight for what you believe in. Feyre starts out as a captive, stripped of everything. But she never loses sight of her own inner strength. She challenges the norms, breaks free, and ultimately becomes this force for change in a world that tried to control her.
I love that. And it's a message that goes beyond the fantasy setting. It's something that everyone can relate to. We all face challenges and setbacks, but Feyre's journey reminds us that we always have a choice. We have the power to fight back and create a better future. It's really amazing how Feyre's journey, kind of mirrors that struggle for empowerment that we see in the real world. Makes you wonder if that's why so many people love this book. It's not just about escaping into a fantasy world.
Yeah, I think you're right.
There's something deeper there that really connects with readers.
I think it's that combination of, relatable struggles with those fantastical elements. We see ourselves in Feyre, wanting freedom and love and acceptance. But she's doing it in this world of fairies and magic. And Maas's writing is so vivid and immersive, it just pulls you right in.
It makes you feel like you're right there in Prythian with her. But I have to ask, not everyone is a fan of this book. Some people think it's predictable and relies too much on those typical fantasy tropes. What do you say to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, some parts might feel familiar, like the whole chosen one thing or the love triangle. But I think Maas takes those elements and makes them her own. She adds layers and creates these characters that feel both familiar and unique at the same time.
Yeah, like Rhysand. He could have been just another bad boy character, but he's so much more than that.
Right. And even with the familiar elements, Maas's world building is so intricate and detailed. It's not just about the plot. It's about the characters and the relationships and these bigger themes like power and sacrifice and love.
Speaking of the characters, we haven't really talked about some of the other people who populate this world. Like Lucien. He's so loyal, and his witty comments really lighten things up sometimes.
Right.
And then there's Amren. She's so ancient and mysterious. She adds this whole element of wisdom and intrigue.
Yeah, I love the supporting characters in this book. They each have their own stories and motivations. They're not just there to move the plot along. They feel like real people.
It really makes the world feel richer and more believable. And even though it's a fantasy novel, it touches on some really important real-world issues, like war and abuse of power and fighting for what's right.
That's something I really admire about Ma's writing. She doesn't shy away from tough topics, but she approaches them with sensitivity. She shows us the darkness, but she also gives us hope.
It's a powerful reminder that even when things are bad, we can overcome them.
And it's not just about individual strength either. It's about community and finding people who support you.
We see that with Feyre and her allies. They rely on each other and face challenges together.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're stronger when we work together.
Makes you appreciate the people in your own life who, lift you up and support you.
And that's what's so great about stories like this. They take us to another world, but they also make us think about our own lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, is there one question you'd like to leave our listeners with, something for them to think about?
Hmm, that's a good question. Let me think. Um, okay, how about this? If you were Feyre, thrown into this world of Fey and magic, what choices would you make? Would you choose safety and comfort, or would you risk it all to fight for what you believe in?
That is such a great question, and it really gets to the heart of what this book is about. Even in a fantasy world, the choices we make define who we are.
And as Feyre's journey continues in the rest of the series, those choices have huge consequences.
Well, I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about today. We've covered the plot, the characters, and some of the big themes that make this book so compelling.
It's a story that really captures the imagination and makes us question our assumptions about the world.
And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive into A Court of Thorns and Roses. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into a new and exciting world.